everyone. Today I have Shipra Parswani with me. Shipra is the director of the Plain Jar, which is a non-profit organization that works with the cases of child abuse, domestic violence, and mental health in Mumbai. They also provide aid to members of the LGBTQIA community. And Shipra is a psychologist by profession, and she currently works at the Thought Co. Very welcome, Shipra. Thank you so much. Very pleased to have you today with me.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So first of all, Shipra, I just wanted to understand from you about your interest in psychology. What point in time did you decide that you wanted to go into psychology and then really seriously pursue this as a career?
I think it happened very organically. I've never been interested in the STEM fields or something that was related to commerce and accounting. So getting into like a social service field or an arts field was very organic for me. And when I started picking on or volunteering or collaborating with other organizations and NGOs is when I knew that this is something that I would be really interested in. And I actually started uh, having or gaining the interest on mental health by volunteering at the Plain Jar first. So I started off as a volunteer and I've been working there for about 4.5 years now. And that's how I actually came to be director. So with my interactions with people, with more awareness and trainings that we've had, is when I kind of found my calling or like found what my interest was.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. So tell us a little bit about the plain jar, although I gave an overview. Just wanted to know from you, so what is it that, how are you providing support for different people in the area of mental health?
Hmm. So as I said, we have been working for about 4 years, and it was also founded by somebody who had also been through domestic violence. So because of their experience, they wanted to kind of start this organization to empower other survivors of abuse and give them a space to kind of understand what they might be feeling and create that sense of support. So the three areas that we do look into is abuse, mental health, and gender sensitization or assistance of the LGBTQIA plus community. We do that in several different ways. One of them is also providing therapy. Sometimes we also try to connect people to therapists who are trauma informed and queer affirmative. When people can't afford therapy, we also try to aid for their, like, let's say, medications or therapy or psychiatric tests and things like that. Another thing that we also do is have support groups which happen weekly, which are open to all people who just want like a safe space to come in and share. So we do have weekly topics, so we would encourage people from different communities or facing different problems to kind of voice out their concerns and also not feel alone. Um, Apart from that, I think we have a lot of trainings and awareness workshops that do happen around the areas of abuse, trauma, awareness, relationships, boundaries, and yeah. I think the biggest program that we have is a program that's called the Buddy System, where we have trained volunteers who come on as pre counselors in our organization and they take up cases as first aid responders. So they would respond to cases of sexual abuse, domestic violence, suicide, self harm, anxiety, depression, and other such concerns. And this is like the first step that you can kind of approach before you take up professional therapy, because that's something that can be really intimidating to some people at first. I think it's about it.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. And as a psychologist, what is it that motivates you to do your job, like to help people with therapy and with all an array of issues that you find with people in terms of mental
I think for me, I feel like it's always the personal reflections that you get to experience when you're talking to another person, and to kind of go on that journey and be like a co-traveler with them on that space is something that's really cool, because I feel like with everyone you share a very different relationship, and I think that's something that's it keeps it really interesting and it keeps it really yeah, I think like having support or having that assistance is something that's really important. So I think being that co-traveler with them is something that's really cool.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of vulnerability that comes with being affected,
Yeah.
like mental health being affected.
Yeah.
And I think to have someone to confide in, and also to, like, get the support when, yeah,
Yeah.
culturally don't seem to have that a lot, when people seek support, and when somebody can get that
Yeah.
support, I think there's a sense of fulfillment for you when you see that you're able to help, and also it kind of goes both ways. But I think, yeah, it's a great thing that you're doing.
Yeah, I think holding that space is something that is really rewarding in a sense. Because I've heard a lot of people from the community, like from the therapist community, also say that, like for the person who's coming to you, I mean, for you, it'll be a 1 hour conversation, right? Because you're kind of seeing different people with different experiences. But for them, you don't know what kind of value that 1 hour conversation can actually hold. You don't know what that process for them to accept or change can hold. And I think that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We've often, I mean, I've had some interactions with people. I personally have had anxiety, and I was was on medication for a long time. So this therapy was
Mhm.
suggested. But some people tend to think that, when they go in therapy, it's very good to unfold the layers and really think where it's all coming from. But I think some people still tend to think that, when they go to therapy, they're just talking about their own experience, whether, what's happened, what the trauma is, like what happened. But they think that, at the end of it, they don't know, like, what to do about it. So how do you make the process more effective in that case?
I think, when you say that people see therapy as a space where you talk, 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 right? And like roaming around in circles is something that can get really exhausting and also really confusing for the person because they're like, okay, I know this now. I know where it's coming from. I know what I'm feeling, but what do I do about it, right? Like, I think the process of that also depends on the kind of therapist you choose and the kind of therapy that they practice. Because a lot of the times when you focus on just emotions, as I said, or as even you said, like it can go in a loop, right? And that can be really frustrating. So finding techniques, finding tools, or even finding like a different type of therapy that can kind of work for you to rewrite your narrative or to understand, now that you have understood those behaviors, how do you move forward? What is the goal that you want to look forward to? How do you work towards that goal? So I think different approaches and different techniques is something that really works here. And, finding the right therapist for you is like a really hard process. And the concept of therapy is hard on its own, but finding a therapist can also be really hard, like someone that you vibe with, someone that you're comfortable with. So I think the relationship that you also share matters or, holds a great like importance when you talk about your journey of change or, understanding yourself.
Yeah, and I think that's very important. Like, obviously, it's given and a no-brainer that as a therapist, one shouldn't judge the experiences of someone. But I know an
Yeah.
example where it was about a relationship kind of breaking down, and a couple having a therapy, and the therapist in turns, kind of starts questioning, okay, if this person went outside of the relationship, you need to think about why did that happen, which probably is okay, but at the same time, you're kind of trying to implicate that the other person has to think, has it happened because of me? It's kind of already
Yeah.
throwing the kind of a blame. So I think you're right.
Yeah.
It's not easy to find the right person, the right therapist who would actually be
Yeah.
non-judgmental, be empathetic, and really try to understand where you're coming from. Because otherwise, it can have like exactly the opposite impact, right? So I think that's a very, very valid
Yes.
point there. So yeah, thank you so much for that. Um, so in terms of abuse, how do you help people who have gone through like sexual abuse, for example? And we're talking about adults here, just to for the sake of keeping this short conversation simple. But like, how do you deal
Yeah.
with adults? As in, how do you try to help adults who've gone through sexual abuse?
I think we provide aid or support in like in different aspects, right? If let's say they want to look at a socio-legal aspect of it, where they want to kind of take up the case or file for the case, whether they want any monetary relief, things like that. I think it really depends on what the survivor needs at the moment, whether it is we have helped people leave abusive households or get out of abusive households and found them safer shelters. That's one thing we've done. Another thing we've also done is connect them to affordable or pro bono legal support, which they could avail to kind of, continue their journey in filing for that case or continue with the process of filing for that case. And another thing would obviously be like psychological aid, where they want to kind of process or heal from their experiences. And yeah, I think like, we talk about how psychology is really, like mental health or even like addressing everything that happened to you is really important. But I feel like it really depends on what the survivor needs right now, right? I think it's easy to say that, okay, maybe you should get help because you've had this experience, you've had this history. But it's also important to understand where they're at, what they need right now, and, kind of go from there. So, yeah.
And how would you say, in terms of identifying the patterns of abuse in adults, of course, so how do you identify the patterns of when somebody is being abused? Like how can if you can give some examples so people can actually think about it, like because sometimes it's so, especially the mental abuse part of it. I know the physical, I mean the mental abuse part of it is something just not straightforward, right? It's complicated in the sense that because you might not realize that it's happening and that the pattern forming. So, what kind of things do you think would be, red flags for mental abuse?
I think this is um, everyone has really different experiences with how they would kind of experience that or how it shows in them, right? When you look at a person who's probably been constantly emotionally abused, right, or like they have been violated or they have been blackmailed, they have been gaslighted, right? I feel like even emotional abuse has so many different aspects to it that you can experience, that it kind of hampers or alters the way that you would behave. So, one of the ways could obviously be you being physically and emotionally withdrawn from people. And that can be an indicator where if this person was someone who was always available to people, who was always there for them, or who was a social person, but has now kind of gone back into this cocoon because they can't kind of deal with it, right? One of this could be one of the reasons. Another thing could also be being really hyper vigilant. What that could also mean is being really alert about everything that's happening in your environment because you're so used to the feeling of feeling unsafe, right? So being on guard all the time, not trusting people, can also be something that could be an indicator. Another thing I think could also just be being extremely emotionally available because you've kind of numbed out everything that's happening, right? Uh, it's really hard for us to kind of process or understand what we're going through, and sometimes blocking those memories out or blocking the feelings or numbing those feelings out could be one of the ways we want to deal with it. And with that comes also the use of substances and kind of numbing your pain or numbing yourself out with that, or self harm, or the feeling of I'm not worth it, I'm hopeless, I don't belong here. Um, yeah, I think it could honestly be like a mix of a lot of factors when you talk about being emotionally violated.
Mm. And what about for somebody who's potentially, sorry, sorry, but I'm putting on the right word. So somebody who's probably getting abused, for that person to actually identify the, the patterns of an abuser. Like, for example, one example would be like if somebody is like their finances are controlled by someone on like constantly and they're not given access to
Yeah.
them. So that's one form of kind of putting pressure on you. That's not right, right? So what other things you think anybody should be able to see and see the red flags that okay, this person is not treating me right, this is wrong, this is abuse?
So when you say that, I think the first thing that like comes to my mind is your autonomy being taken away from you.
Mm.
And I think that's something we see a lot with our Indian culture, is where you feel like you don't have that independence, you feel like you don't have that autonomy. Another thing that I feel like we'll also, or some people will also experience, is the fact that I'm kind of stuck in this, where I want to get out of it and I'm feeling this hurt, but I also feel like this is what it's supposed to be like because this is how it has been for other people, right? So how do I kind of get out of it? Another thing could also be the perpetrator or the person who is, harming this other person or harming the survivor, take advantage of this person, blackmail them, gaslight them, make them feel like they're responsible for everything that is bad, make them feel like it's their fault. So shaming them and making them feel guilty about everything that has happened, right? And you kind of internalizing that is also one sign of harm, or like one sign where you're kind of, you've put that harm, or you feel like you're responsible for that
Mm, mm. Yeah, so
harm, right?
I
So I feel
know.
like the sense of, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Continue.
So I was saying that I know of an example where, again, in a relationship, when someone is like, "Why are you being so upset?" So this person is feeling anxious. They're probably going through stuff in the relationship. They're constantly upset, constantly getting upset without having any care anymore about who are they around, where are they, and
Yeah.
the other the partner saying that it's not like anybody's actually beating you up that you're that upset. So now I think that's like two very, very different points. But at the same time, it's like some people just tend to believe if it's not physical abuse, it's not abuse. But like you're totally undermining the fact that person is like mentally affected by whatever the situation is, whatever the circumstance.
Yeah.
So to say to someone that
Yeah.
just the fact that nobody's hitting you, if nobody's hitting you, then why are you so upset? I think it kind of goes on to say like sometimes how ignorant people can be about how
Yeah,
men.
I think like stigma has a very big role to play in this because as you said, if you're not getting physically harmed or physically violated, everything else that you're experiencing is fine. It's
Yeah.
okay. Everyone goes through that. And I feel like that's the thought that kind of is a beginning to be like, oh, am I the one who's perceiving this as wrong? Am I the one who's
Exactly.
overthinking this
Yeah.
situation? And that's what I like. And I think this ties up with when I spoke about guilt and that internal shame that you kind of feel for even feeling these feelings.
Yeah.
Or for even like, because you don't know what's going on with you. Everyone is invalidating your experiences. You're feeling isolated from everything. So I think it becomes this circle of, miscommunication, not understanding yourself, other people not understanding you. And yeah,
And I think it's a typical example of gaslighting, like, when the problem is actually there without identifying the problem, you're actually trying to put the blame on the other person by saying, actually, no. And then, that can totally feel a person is being abused, in terms of emotional abuse, feeling like, okay, maybe I'm overreacting, but like, it's not how it works, right? So yeah, you're right. The stigma is like, it's ridiculous. My next question would be about, I know that your organization also helps with giving support to the LGBTQIA community.
yeah,
I know things have changed in the recent past. Like, sometimes I think they go back to square one and then they move ahead. But like in your experience, I'm sure there's a lot of challenges, but if you could pick like a couple of main challenges that you come across when you see people in that community, in the community with mental health issues.
um, I think, as I said, right, like when you talk about queer life stressors and when you talk about the stressors that a person who identifies from the community has to experience, uh, I feel like it's no matter how much you talk about it, it's something that you have to really understand, or it's something that you really have to be sensitized towards, because the fact that we live in a society which is a very normative society where we think that gender or sexuality is very binary, it's seen as very black and white. The feeling of that you're not in those binaries and the feeling of that you're not belonging to either black or either white can be on its own very isolating. And on its own, that internal homonegativity that comes by is something that makes you feel like there's something wrong with me. I don't know what's going on. Um, one is self acceptance. I feel like the biggest, like, thing over here would be like accepting themselves for who they are, because they're taught to believe that whatever's going on with them is a phase, is a disease, is a choice, and is wrong, right? I feel like that in every aspect of society or any institution you look at, our school books only have examples of heterosexual couples or of um very like feminine traits or masculine traits for men and women. There would be no mention of fluidity. There would be even gender roles that you have, right? Um, Women are taught to be more emotional, men are taught to be more instrumental, take care of the household, things like that, right? So when you bring in examples of that, again, it kind of makes invalidates your identity, invalidates your experience. When you look at a job, you're never accepted into it. Like our organization has worked with a lot of queer identifying individuals or people from the trans community who are not given job opportunities solely because of the way they look, solely because of the way they behave, solely because of the way they act, right? Majority of the cases of abuse, majority of the cases of suicide are also associated to people who are from the community because of the fact that because of their identity, right? Because they're not accepted, because they feel like no one will ever understand them, uh, because they feel like the world would be a better place without them, because that's what they're made to believe, right? And yeah, in terms of how our organization kinds of assists that, I think the biggest thing that we've done or we like always do is accept whoever's coming our way, ask for their pronouns, provide support, which is by professionals who are queer affirmative or from the community itself, get them legal support if needed for name change, get them shelter homes where the shelter homes are not abusive or where the shelter homes are more accepting of change, and basically provide that sense of community or sense of support to make them understand that they're not alone in this. And yeah, and I think even if not for them, even if you're talking as an ally, how do you be a better ally? How do you be a better responder to a person who's going to come out to you or who's going to tell you their experiences? And how do you, not invalidate that? How do you validate their experience and accept them for who they are?
So much. So very quickly, the last question I have is, what would your advice be to parents? So I think there's a generation of, from before us where I think it's quite an established fact that, that generation didn't have kind of mental health issue just didn't exist for them. So it was hard for them to really accept that this exists and
Yeah.
that they need to seek help. So, I think what happens is that, parents, when they have some of these issues and they're not able to cope because they're not seeking help, they end up, kind of end up inflicting that, or maybe imposing their own trauma onto the children, wherein, the children can't understand what's going on. And I believe that sometimes what happens is the children kind of take over the patterns of behaviors that probably come from the parents. So what would your advice be to parents? I mean, there's a lot we can do, but like, there's a lot that we cannot do. We just have to try to have a mutual understanding with a generation which is not open about it. But then going forward, like, what would your advice to be would be to parents to make sure that the children are not taking on from them, going forward?
Yeah. I think when you say that, it brings out a very important point that, that हमारे ज़माने में ये सब नहीं होता था, or like, these things never happened in our generation or in our time, and these things are happening now, or the generation of today is too aware. But I also feel like because of the awareness that has been brought out today, every feeling that we have had has now gotten a label to it. And earlier, people still would experience stress, people still would experience anxiety or suicidality, but they would never have a term to put to it, or they would never understand what they can do with it, right? Tools were not available at that point. And another aspect also over here comes is the attachment that you have with your caregiver. So I think when you talk about your relationship with your caregiver, how to have a secure attachment with your child, how to heal from your past traumas and build a better relationship is also something that can be really important here. And I think this conversation cannot just end at this, but it needs to be a start. There needs to be a start with understanding your own behaviors, your own actions, and how it impacts your children.
Well, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Shipra. It's been so, insightful speaking with you. I really appreciate it. And I think we're going to have a lot more of these chats to discuss different topics in much more detail. But I really appreciate the time that you've taken. And like, honestly, thank you so much for, talking about the organization and your work and giving us different types of insights and perspectives on various issues related to mental health, which I think is the need of the hour, given how far behind we are as a society, as a culture, in terms of understanding what does it really mean, and the impact that it's having on people's lives. So thank you so much, and yeah, take care, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you so much for having me and even holding this space to continue conversations like this. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you. Pleasure is all mine. Thank you. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.